Hello everyone. There was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan late last year. Looking at the article, I looked for the reasons why the two countries are fighting and what they have to do with the Bible. In the Great Flood of Noah in 2458 BC, all mankind died and only 8 members of Noah's family remained. Since 2457 BC to this day, from Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the population has reached over 7 billion in about 4,500 years. Noah's first son, Japheth, is related to Armenia and Azerbaijan. Japheth's sons are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras. Which of these are Armenian and Azerbaijan ancestors? The book Antiquities of the Jews by Jewish historian Josephus in the 1st century AD, and many scholars classify it as this. Armenia came from Gomer. Magog is the ancestor of the Scythian, and Turks came from the Scythian. Therefore, Magog becomes the ancestor of Turkey, Azerbaijan. Descendants of the Turks. The ancestor of Armenia and Azerbaijan are Gomer and Magog respectively. Since Medes, Persians came from Madai, Madai is the ancestor of Iran today. Javan is an Ionian Greek ancestor. Tubal is the ancestor of Georgia, a small country right under Russia. Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, comes directly from Tubal. Meshech was the ancestor of Slavs and became Russia today. Moscow, the capital of Russia, comes from Meshech. Tiras is the ancestor of former Yugoslav states of Slovenia, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, and Montenegro. Let's look at the map again and organize it. Greek ancestry is Javan. The descendants of the Tiras are former Yugoslav states in Bulgaria. Armenian ancestry is Gomer. The ancestors of Turkey and Azerbaijan are Magog. The ancestors of Iran are the Madai. Georgia's ancestors are Tubal. The ancestor of Russia is Meshech. As you can see, Turkey and Azerbaijan have the same ancestry because both are Turkic. Turkey considers Azerbaijan its brother country, so Turkey actively helps Azerbaijan whenever Azerbaijan fights with Armenia. As it will come out later, it is said that Turkey slaughtered 1.5 million Armenians. On the map, Armenia and Azerbaijan are close together, but Armenia belongs to Europe, while Azerbaijan, who is Turkish, belongs to Asia. So they are similar in appearance, but they have different religions, languages, cultures, and history. Armenia is said to have first encountered the gospel through Thaddeus and Bartholomew, who were Jesus' 12 disciples. Since then, Armenia has become the world's first Christian country in 301 AD, before Rome, and still believes in a denomination of Christianity to this day. Armenia was part of the Byzantine Empire from the 7th century AD, and it was ruled by the Islamic State of Seljuk Turk in 1064 AD. It came under the control of Ottoman Turk in the 13th century AD. Ottoman Turks were powerful enough to capture Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, in 1453 AD. But more than 400 years later, in the 19th century, they went downhill. On the other hand, over 400 years from 15th to the 18th century AD, Europe achieved modernization and grew into a great power through religious reforms, geographical discoveries, industrial revolutions, and civil revolutions. In the 19th century, European powers intervened in the domestic affairs in the name of guaranteeing the rights of Christians in the Ottoman Turks. And in this atmosphere, many ethnic groups in the Ottoman Empire wanted to become independent. Then Muslims in the Ottoman Empire suspected Christians as spies of the European powers, and their feelings for them grew worse. In 1877, the Ottoman Empire was defeated in the war against Russia. When Greece first gained independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1894, Ottoman became increasingly nervous. Dissatisfaction and anti-Christian sentiment against European powers who believe in Christianity and their supportive peoples reached a height, and this anger poured out on Armenians who believed in Christianity. From 1894 to 1895, Armenians were slaughtered between 100,000 and 300,000 people. Later, the Ottoman Empire was defeated in both the Balkan Wars from 1912 to 1913 and World War I, which broke out in 1914. However, in 1915, during World War I, the Ottoman genocide of Armenians occurred once again. In 1915, the Ottoman Empire and Russia clashed in Caucasus, where Armenians lived. Concerned about Armenians' cooperation with Russia, the Ottoman Empire forced Armenians to move to the Syrian desert, and many Armenians died in the process. Also, the new Youth Turk Party in power in Ottoman Empire, which was an Islamic nationalist, saw Armenians as ethnically inferior, not just for religious reasons, and regarded them as objects of eradication. Thus, the Young Turks massacred Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians to stop their uprising. In particular, 1.5 million Armenians were slaughtered from 1915 to 1917. But the former Ottoman Empire, the Turkish government, has yet to acknowledge that. Recently, on April 24th of this year, 2021, President Biden of the United States officially recognized the Armenian massacre of the Ottoman Empire, the predecessor of Turkey, as a genocide. President Erdogan of Turkey strongly protested about this. Anyway, after that genocide, taking advantage of the chaotic situation caused by the Russian Revolution of 1917, on May 28, 1918, Armenia declared its independence and established the Democratic Republic. However, in 1920, Armenia was forcibly absorbed by the Soviet Union again. In 1923, Stalin, the Soviet Union, gave Azerbaijan ownership of the Nagorno-Karabakh region. But 80% of the population there was Armenian, and only 20% were Azerbaijan. The conflict was bound to continue. Armenia had been building up repressed anger for 70 years. So as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Armenia started an all-out war with Azerbaijan in 1992 and captured Nagorno-Karabakh in 1994. But France and Russia mediated, ending with the bizarre situation that under international law, Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan's territory, but in fact, Armenian territory. Let's take a look at the map of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is Nagorno-Karabakh right here. Due to the ambiguous circumstances in which Armenia effectively controls the territory as it belongs to Azerbaijan. Even after the 1994 armistice, the two continued to engage in small skirmishes. After all, the Second War broke out in 2016. Azerbaijan, which lost the First War in 1992, gained the upper hand in the Second War with full support from its brother Turkey and weapons such as unmanned drone attack aircraft imported from Israel. They agreed to cease fire again in Moscow. 4 years later, on September 27, 2020, the last year, the war broke out again, resulting in thousands of casualties. On November 10, 2020, with the Russian mediation, Azerbaijan had a major region, and Russia decided to send peacekeepers for 5 years there. As all the records showed that Nagorno-Karabakh was part of the Armenian kingdom in the 2nd century BC, Nagorno-Karabakh was originally an Armenian home. However, because of the invasion of the Abbasid and the Seljukids, the area has been transformed into a region where Christian and Islamic forces live mixed together. Later, under Soviet rule in the 1920s, the Soviet Union took ownership of the Nagorno-Karabakh region and left the embers in the region, creating a basis for Russia's continued involvement in the region, which continues to this day. On January 11, 2021, earlier this year, Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Azerbaijan President and Armenian Prime Minister at the Kremlin in Moscow. It was to discuss the implementation of Nagorno-Karabakh region ceasefire agreed in November 2020. Western European countries could help Armenia, the same Christianity, but no one is getting involved in this, maybe because they have nothing to gain. One of the reasons why no one helps Armenia is because of the Baku oil field in Azerbaijan. In Georgia, a Christian country, Armenia's neighboring country, pipes connecting oil fields from Baku and natural gas to Europe are passing by. Georgia is making hundreds of millions of dollars every year through this pipe, so they can stand by Armenia. Israel also helps Azerbaijan, an Islamic country, because of Baku oil. 40% of oil for Israel's army is imported from Baku, Azerbaijan. While researching the Baku oil field, I learned something surprising. Until the 1860s, Rockefeller and Rothschild families dominated the global oil market, but Rockefeller and Rothschild lost the competition after Sweden's Nobel family, who immigrated to Russia after the 1870s, produced a huge amount of oil from Russia-owned Azerbaijan Baku oil fields. Since then, Rockefeller and Rothschild families have sponsored Lenin preparing for the Russian Communist Revolution. And if the revolution succeeds, they are promised not to produce crude oil from Baku oil field anymore. In 1917, Lenin succeeded in the Bolshevik Revolution. As promised, destroying Baku in 1920, massacred many people, stopping oil production, and finally, oil capitalists such as Rockefeller and Rothschild again monopolized the oil market. Currently, the Baku oil field is 20% owned by Azerbaijan and 80% by multinational companies such as BP in the UK. Lenin's communist revolution was caused by criticism of the bourgeoisie. It is a great irony that Lenin received sponsorship funds from the Rockefeller and Rothschild family, the representatives of the bourgeoisie, to succeed in the revolution. As expected, nothing can be done without money in this world. There is no compassion or sympathy in the harsh international order. Diplomacy of the great powers is ultimately judging and acting in their own interest. They purposely make small and medium-sized countries fight with each other so they can benefit from it. The most representative example is Armenia and Azerbaijan continuing their endless fight over Nagorno-Karabakh. In 1895, the first massacre against Armenians by the Ottoman Turks in Korea, there was an Urmi incident in which Japan killed and burned the queen of Joseon dynasty. In 1915, during the second massacre against Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, Korea was mired in sorrow and pain of losing its country for the first time in its 5,000-year history due to Japan's unauthorized rule, which began in 1910. At the time, not only Korea but also many weak countries struggled under the control of powerful countries. Armenia was one of them. Now, on the surface, they are all independent states. Still, this world is driven by the logic of power. Weak nations are always being pushed around in great powers that only work for their own benefit. But such a history is also being driven by the invisible hand of God. Daniel chapter 2 verse 21 says that God changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 6 said that God brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. World history changes a lot depending on who becomes the President of the United States. The being who establishes the President of the United States is also God after all. So it's hard to understand with our eyes. World history is included in God's redemptive history. Ultimately, it is the history of the process of making God's redemption. The reason why I think we should study world history and the history of our own country harder with Bible study is because it is to realize the history of God's redemption in the world history. There is no doubt that all history in the world is not a completely different story from the history of God's redemption but is interlocked like a cog. Prophets such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel were thorough believers, but they also knew the history and current events of the world. They knew how to see the world from a macroscopic perspective, not a narrow-minded religious personality. So they realized the providence of God who was living in it and were able to predict the history of the world that would happen. Through history, current affairs, and the Bible, I hope that all of you and me will realize God's will properly with insights such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel. Thank you.